Identity protection and confidentiality protocols have been applied to specific names and particulars within this account. Supplementary imagery may be utilized for illustrative purposes. Allentown, Pennsylvania, May 2014. Two 18-year-old graduates, William Wade and Ruben Briggs, departed their commencement ceremony after midnight, only to vanish into the night shadows. Without a single witness or clue left behind, precisely 6 months passed before a long-haul driver spotted a depleted William along Highway 22. The survivor recounted a chilling narrative. He spoke of abductors in a blacked-out van and a frigid subterranean bunker where his companion reportedly remained trapped. Nearby, laborers unearthed Ruben's silver timepiece from the muck. As fear saturated the community, authorities initiated a massive sweep for the perpetrators. Investigators remained oblivious that the truth behind the vanishing wasn't hidden within some criminal hideout, but beneath the massive weight of the regional hospital's freshly poured foundations. Allentown, Pennsylvania, May 2014. A once thriving manufacturing hub framed by thick woods and derelict excavation sites. For these 18-year-old peers, May 16th represented the threshold separating childhood innocence from the realities of the adult world for William Wade and Ruben Briggs. The neighborhood high school celebrated its commencement that particular Friday. Statements gathered from numerous onlookers depicted a standard, unremarkable graduation event. A faculty member informed investigators on May 18th that both teenagers appeared upbeat, displaying zero indications of distress. Ruben's mother told officers her final contact occurred at 11:45 p.m. during a brief call. He mentioned the ceremony had concluded, noting his intention to wander through town with William. His arrival was expected no later than 2:00 a.m. However, sunrise passed without their return. By 9 a.m. on May 17th, the families officially reported their sons missing to the local precinct. Initial police response followed routine protocols. While taking the report, the desk sergeant cautioned that teens frequently disappear into unannounced post-graduation celebrations. Aviation units stayed grounded, and canine search teams weren't mobilized. The first 48 hours were treated as a typical runaway scenario. Instead of launching a massive physical search, investigators prioritized a meticulous digital and forensic analysis. Witness statements placed William and Ruben's departure from the school grounds at roughly 1:45 a.m. Their path led north, toward the periphery, where suburban streetlights yield to the decaying structures of the manufacturing district. Subpoenas were issued for the teenagers' mobile records. The data provided by the carriers merely deepened the unfolding mystery. Ruben's device pinged a local tower for the final time at 1:20 a.m. before going dark. William's connection severed nearly at the same moment, with only a 4-minute discrepancy. This abrupt, coordinated silence prompted officials to escalate the disappearance to a high-priority criminal investigation. A systematic canvass of surveillance systems began along their projected trajectory. Specialists spent countless hours scrutinizing recordings from traffic cameras and local businesses. The first major lead didn't surface until May 19th, 3 days into the search. Detectives secured video archives from a filling station located on West Union Boulevard. A peripheral camera monitoring the dark shoulder of the road picked up two shapes moving through the low-resolution frame. The timestamps burned into the footage provided the definitive timeline for the official log. At 1:14 a.m., the grainy silhouettes were positively identified. The figures were indeed the two missing graduates. They were trekking along the unpaved shoulder, maintaining distance from the passing lanes. Though still clad in their formal attire, their appearance was now noticeably disheveled and worn. Behavioral analysis of their stride suggested no impairment from intoxicants. Their movement appeared steady and intentional. Their heading troubled the task force, as West Union Boulevard bypassed all local housing developments. The road terminated at a desolate limestone pit on Allentown's fringes, cutting through a landscape of vacant industrial shells. The terrain was a sprawling expanse of jagged earth and treacherous gullies. Scattered with crumbling masonry, the site was silent as the two figures moved without exchanging a single word. They pressed forward, melting into the dense gloom beneath the trees. At 1 hour, 15 minutes, and 40 seconds, the pair vanished from the camera's periphery. One shadow slipped into the dark, followed shortly by the next, prompting detectives to seize all surrounding commercial surveillance. Analysts logged grueling hours scrutinizing the playback monitors, parsing every second of footage from warehouses along the projected path, yet the mounting void only intensified their dread. Despite a linear route with no exits, neither teenager materialized on any subsequent feeds that evening. Past the reach of the fuel station's lens, A total blind spot began where the two youths seemingly evaporated from existence, stepping into a pitch-black void. 6 months had passed since that May disappearance. By November 2014, night temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees Fahrenheit as a biting autumn mist choked Allentown. At 3:15 in the morning on November 16th, a trucker on Route 22 spotted a figure on the dark shoulder. Per the official deposition given to responding officers, the individual was walking with a heavy stagger, oblivious to the massive vehicle's high beams. The driver engaged the brakes, stopped the rig, and climbed down. He found a young man in tattered, filthy garments wholly unfit for the freezing weather. His eyes were vacant and detached, his skin mapped with minor abrasions. Police arrived and ran the subject through the database, yielding a perfect match. It was William Wade, the same student whose trail had gone cold half a year earlier. The survivor was immediately transported to Central City Hospital's emergency ward. Initial triage noted severe exhaustion and dehydration, along with various scratches, but found no life-threatening trauma. Major crimes investigators were soon dispatched to his bedside. Archive recordings of the interview capture William speaking in a flat, monotonous drone, his voice trembling as he detailed the unsettling chronology of that night in May. He claimed an unmarked dark van intercepted them near the abandoned limestone quarry. Wade testified that 2 unidentified assailants emerged from the vehicle. The assault was clinical and violent. They were clubbed, bound, and thrown onto the van's steel floor. William described being held in a humid, lightless cellar with massive concrete walls. Deprived of sunlight and direction, they survived solely on meager rations provided by their captors. When questioned about his reappearance, William outlined a desperate bid for freedom. He alleged that on that final night, a kidnapper failed to secure the heavy iron bolt on the basement door. Seizing the moment while the abductors slept, he fled into the forest, running for hours without pause. However, the mention of Ruben Briggs caused William's expression to fracture visibly. The interrogation report states he claimed ignorance regarding his friend's current whereabouts. Wade asserted that the captors had removed Ruben from the cellar weeks prior, never to return. This first-hand witness account triggered a frantic, aggressive new phase of the investigation. While artists rendered sketches and police issued alerts for the van, a pivotal event was unfolding across the city. At 10:45 on the morning of November 18th, laborers were finishing the grounds of a newly erected municipal medical facility. After a year of development, the crew was grading soil near the hospital's stark concrete facade. Torrential overnight rains had scoured the embankment, washing away the topsoil. A member of the crew, while digging, spotted a metallic glint in the wet muck and retrieved a dirt-caked object. Once cleared of the grime, it revealed itself as a heavy silver watch with a severed band. Recognizing its potential worth, the site supervisor surrendered the find to the local precinct. Upon inspecting the mechanism, the technician caught sight of the etching hidden on its reverse side. Years of moisture failed to erode the lettering, which remained eerily legible. Dawn brought the Briggs family to headquarters, where a single glance from the mother confirmed her worst fears. Detectives watched as she identified the piece as a high-end commemorative gift for her son's commencement. Every ledger entry from the jeweler aligned perfectly with the timeline established by the grieving parents. This silver timepiece emerged as the solitary shred of physical proof after 180 days of silence. The investigation pivoted instantly as the watch placed the vanished youth physically within city limits. Yet this polished artifact offered the lab team far more chilling enigmas than it did solutions. Where the object was found stood in total contradiction to the survivor's account of the kidnapping. This medical facility sat leagues from the quarry, miles away from the path of Route 22. Per the lead investigator's official summary, the device lay buried in soil, bordering a massive, recently set concrete base. This placement defied logical assumptions regarding the suspect's paths. Officers faced a haunting spatial paradox, where the survivor's words were silenced by the Earth's physical reality. Welcome. Before further deconstructing this grisly file, please consider following, commenting, and hitting the like button. Your engagement signals the platform's ranking system to circulate this investigation to a wider audience. Such backing ensures these reports reach more eyes, funding the pursuit of future cold cases. This project lives solely on your continued attention. Returning to the timeline following the survivor's statement, the Allentown force mobilized on maximum alert. Every asset within the Major Crimes Division focused exclusively on hunting down the abductors. Despite the fractures of trauma, William Wade's account held details of a terrifyingly visceral nature. Under questioning, the boy's voice wavered as he recounted the thick concrete walls of their underground prison. He detailed the corroded ceiling pipes, the incessant rhythm of falling water, and the pungent stench of decay. Per his statement, the suspects utilized a dark-colored van lacking any identifying plates. Armed with these clues, specialized units initiated an expansive sweep of the neighboring countryside. Analysts mapped every potential escape path, scouring derelict motels and hangars flanking Highway 309. Simultaneously, tactical teams inspected decaying agricultural structures nestled beneath the Blue Mountains. Officers systematically breached every derelict warehouse door, scouring farmhouse cellars and illuminating the shadows of dilapidated garage complexes. Every door kicked in held the grim hope of locating a weary Ruben Briggs inside. Concurrently, William inhabited the persona of a shattered survivor with haunting precision. Notes from the court-appointed therapist indicated that the youth manifested every hallmark of profound psychological trauma. He became a recluse, shunning the outdoors and insisting his windows remain shrouded in total darkness. His mother described him staring blankly into corners for hours, trembling at the most trivial noise. Detectives viewed this shell as a textbook trauma response. It merely solidified their resolve, fueling an even more aggressive pursuit of the monsters responsible. The department funneled massive assets into the search. Local officials posted a significant bounty for any lead concerning the dark van or its occupants. Data analysts combed federal archives day and night, cross-referencing this disappearance with historical abductions. Detectives grilled hundreds of street sources, vetted every local van owner, and chased down each whisper from anonymous callers. Fear and suspicion began to choke the streets of Allentown. A pervasive dread paralyzed the residents as faceless predators allegedly prowled their streets, keeping a captive hidden in some subterranean hell. Nightly broadcasts flickered across local screens, saturated with urgent warnings for the public to remain on high alert. Escorted school runs became the new norm, and by late afternoon, the once vibrant avenues turned into desolate ghost towns. Public outcry for swift justice intensified, placing an unbearable weight on the shoulders of the lead investigators. Daily briefings focused on a relentless cycle of dead-end leads and addresses that led to nowhere. Weeks of grueling searches through dozens of damp basements failed to produce even a single shred of evidence. Detectives were left chasing phantoms, desperate for a discarded garment or a faint tire impression in the dirt. Yet, as the investigation deepened and the victim's narrative appeared suspiciously flawless, the case began to feel like a haunting illusion destined to shatter and reveal a far more disturbing reality. By December 2014, icy gusts buried Allentown under a thick, suffocating layer of winter frost. Despite the freezing weather, the pressure within the precinct suddenly surged as the case reached a critical flashpoint. Following months of dead ends and the systematic vetting of countless suspicious locations, a confidential informant provided a detail suggesting the long-sought breakthrough was finally within reach. While systematically clearing derelict industrial sites on the northern outskirts, 10 miles from the suburbs, investigators stumbled upon a decaying facility called Oak Haven Storage. This mid-century industrial relic now stood as a silent, decaying monument. It featured corroding hangars and a subterranean labyrinth, abandoned for years due to flooding and stagnant air. On December 12th, at 8 in the morning, the silent operation began. A ghost-like procession of unmarked units approached the facility's rusted gates without alerting a soul. Tactical teams breached the perimeter with weapons drawn, prepared for a violent confrontation with the captors. Navigating by faded city blueprints, the officers pushed deeper into the structural decay. The unit descended cautiously, reaching the stagnant depths of the third subterranean floor. The sights illuminated by their high-intensity beams forced even the most seasoned officers to pause. The dark chamber mirrored William Wade's harrowing description with terrifying, surgical precision. Looming concrete slabs were choked by a thick, virulent carpet of toxic black mold. Corroded pipes snaked across the sagging ceiling, weeping rhythmic droplets into the oppressive silence. A massive steel door, reinforced by heavy chains and sheared locks, guarded the primary holding cell. The correlation was so absolute that any previous skepticism vanished instantly. Doubts regarding the survivor's credibility dissolved like smoke in the face of this grim reality. For a department besieged by public scorn and media scrutiny, this discovery offered a chance at redemption. This hellish, forgotten basement became the definitive evidence of a predator's existence. Authorities were convinced this freezing concrete tomb was where the ordeal occurred. In this concrete cage, the victims had allegedly been erased from the world for months on end. It was here that William had supposedly defied the odds and staged his miraculous flight to freedom. Crime scene tapes soon cordoned off the entire perimeter, sealing the site in a yellow plastic shroud. Technicians in hazmat gear began the meticulous process of harvesting evidence from the shadows. Their objective was simple: find any biological fingerprint belonging to Ruben Briggs, William Wade, or their captors. Experts spent over 14 days meticulously scouring the damp, dark cellar. They applied chemical reagents to the freezing concrete, looking for traces invisible to the naked eye. These compounds reveal scrubbed blood stains, illuminating the past under the glare of ultraviolet lamps. Vacuums sucked up dust and ancient webs, searching for a single fiber to break the case. They sought microscopic evidence: a hair, a skin cell, or threads from formal attire. Back in the city, the atmosphere remained electric with anxiety and mounting public unrest. The dispatch center buckled under a relentless surge of calls from a terrified public. Sightings of windowless vans near gas stations and supermarkets fueled the growing community paranoia. Investigators were forced to pursue every lead, regardless of how improbable they appeared on the surface. Vital days vanished as they intercepted delivery vehicles, interrogated random motorists, and vetted alibis for dark-colored minivan owners throughout Pennsylvania. It was a grueling hunt for ghosts that bled the department of its manpower, time, and E. By late January 2015, a heavy file of forensic reports finally hit the lead investigator's desk. The specialized findings struck the precinct like a sudden, chilling realization. Despite a flawless alignment with the witness descriptions, 0 traces of Ruben Briggs' DNA were detected in that damp Oakhaven Village cellar. William Wade had also left no biological signature behind in the room. Every sophisticated laboratory screening returned the same haunting result: a total sterile void. The lab suggested that extreme humidity might have eventually eroded organic evidence over time. However, the utter lack of any biological markers after 2 people supposedly occupied the space was a physical and statistical impossibility. The case, which recently seemed destined for a heroic rescue and a swift resolution, was now slamming into a cold, immovable wall before the detectives' eyes. As winter bled into spring, the momentum died and the investigation began to rot, becoming the most visible failure in the force's history. Law enforcement was trapped in a desperate paradox. They had a survivor, a perfect description of the crime scene, and a dungeon that mirrored every word, yet they lacked a single strand of hair or a drop of blood to anchor the story to reality. A suffocating, grim weight of professional failure settled over the entire investigative team. While the parents begged for answers, one veteran detective sat in the archives, obsessively poring over William's statements. A senior investigator, he began to entertain a nagging, dark suspicion. The cellar seemed too perfect to be real, as if the details came from a rehearsed monologue rather than a victim's fractured memory. This subtle, toxic inconsistency began to take root, threatening to shatter the city's blind faith forever. It was now February 2015. After months of chasing shadows and finding nothing but a sterile warehouse, the Allentown police hit a dead end. The mystery of the Ruben Briggs disappearance was slowly dissolving into a stack of cold, inconclusive files. At this breaking point, Command decided it was time to bring in an outsider's perspective. A sharp, ambitious analyst from the Pennsylvania State Police Criminal Division joined the task force. His primary advantage was being unburdened by the emotional fatigue of the local team, immune to the relentless scrutiny of the local media, and able to dissect the evidence with a detached, clinical precision. After auditing the entire file, the analyst made a radical, calculated move. He discarded months of local legwork entirely. Ignoring the search for the dark vans, he zeroed in on William Wade's initial statement. He was not interested in the abduction itself, but in the timeline following the boy's supposed escape from captivity. According to the official records, William swore that after breaking free, he fled into the wilderness, paralyzed by the fear of being hunted. He claimed he headed north, sheltering in the dense brush near the Appalachian Trail in the rugged Lehigh Gap. By his account, he survived in the elements, hiding in ravines and scavenging for scraps at deserted campsites. The analyst began a cold, methodical dissection of this survival story. Official requests to the Weather Service yielded a granular meteorological breakdown of the Blue Mountain sector during October and early November. 2014. Records painted a portrait of a brutal autumn. Throughout that time frame, Lehigh Gap saw unprecedented freezing rainfall as temperatures plummeted below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Gale-force gusts transformed mountain passes into lethal wind tunnels, making unprotected exposure survivable for only a matter of hours. Armed with these findings, the investigators scrutinized Williams' clinical assessment from the November evening he emerged on the shoulder of Highway 22. Doctors noted minor dehydration and exhaustion, accompanied by faint dermal abrasions. Within these pages, the analyst identified a glaring, irrefutable fracture in the boy's story. The charts contain no mention of localized necrosis or frostbite. Enduring weeks in saturated, sub-freezing woodlands without shelter or specialized thermal gear while retaining full circulation in one's digits is a biological impossibility for the human frame. Furthermore, the subject lacked any signs of parasitic bites or forest-dwelling insects common to that terrain. He displayed no evidence of acute pulmonary distress or lingering pneumonia. William appeared remarkably resilient for someone supposedly weathering Arctic rains without survival equipment in the wilderness. Forest Service reports confirm zero evidence of makeshift encampments or human activity within a 15-mile radius of the Appalachian Trail corridor. The disparate facts refused to align. However, the definitive contradiction arose when the detective examined the physics behind the alleged escape itself. During recorded testimony, the young man detailed his flight from the subterranean cell. He alleged that he scavenged a length of corroded rebar to pry open a heavy-duty padlock, forcing the steel door while his captors slept in the rooms above. The analyst consulted structural engineers and physical security specialists for a technical review. After inspecting the hardware typical of such sites, their conclusion was swift and absolute. His story defied every known law of mechanics. Snapping a hardened steel shackle with a crude lever demanded 10 times the torque an emaciated, terrified adolescent could possibly exert. Even assuming some supernatural surge of adrenaline, the kinetic kickback from the metal's failure would have shredded his palms and shattered the carpal bones in his wrists, or perhaps dislocated his shoulders entirely. Forensic imagery of his hands showed nothing but superficial grime, no bruising, no lacerations, and no evidence of traumatic pressure against his skin. The carefully built facade began to disintegrate upon the desk in that silent, dimly lit office. The analyst compiled the weather data, clinical findings, and engineering proofs. He stared at the photograph of William Wade pinned to the corkboard, searching for the truth in his eyes. He no longer saw a shattered victim of a kidnapping. He saw a calculating individual who had systematically manipulated the authorities and the public for months. The hunt for imaginary monsters was over. It was time to interrogate the man who had been orchestrating the charade from the very beginning. Seizing the file, the analyst rose from his chair, marching toward the chief's office with the revelation that would strip the mask from the entire case. March of 2015 marked the moment the Ruben Briggs investigation shifted forever. When the evidence of the fabrication hit the police chief's desk, a heavy, suffocating silence gripped the Allentown headquarters. The search for shadowy figures in unmarked vans, which had wasted months of resources, pivoted 180 degrees. The focus narrowed exclusively onto the man who claimed to be the victim. The department's high command reached investigators opted for total discretion, fearing any overt move might alert the subject or result in destroyed evidence. A massive, clandestine operation was covertly launched to monitor the young man's every activity. The detectives required a definitive, undeniable catalyst. They understood that technical discrepancies regarding weather or lock mechanics wouldn't shatter William's psychological armor inside the interview room. Their goal was the core motivation, that hidden impulse that could drive a man to murder his closest friend on that frigid night in May. Consequently, police systematically re-examined every student, teacher, and guest present at the final graduation party. Slowly, nearly 12 months passed by. The initial, paralyzing terror of Ruben's disappearance eventually began to dissipate. As the grief dulled, students graduated, migrated to university campuses, or entered the workforce. According to the extensive spring interrogation files, these witnesses were now blunt and cynical, no longer shielding the victim or pitying the survivor. The collective shroud of mourning had finally lifted, revealing the disturbing reality of the boys' friendship during hours of questioning in cramped, sterile offices. A long-buried layer of intense hostility between the two inseparable friends began to emerge. Several associates claimed that during the months leading to graduation, a rift formed between Ruben and William, rooted in a basic yet poisonous envy. Official statements noted that Ruben, the son of successful local entrepreneurs, had already secured admission to an elite university on the East Coast. His future was a path of wealth and opportunity. William, however, shared a tiny flat with a mother struggling to pay bills. After high school, his only prospect was grueling dead-end labor at a local shipping warehouse. Classmates remembered William's biting comments about Ruben's money, a class divide that slowly corroded their bond. Yet, financial resentment alone didn't explain the violence. The actual trigger, revealed by new testimony, was a standard romantic drama unfolding at the prom. A female classmate's name suddenly became central to the investigation. Sworn statements indicated William had harbored a silent obsession for years, viewing the dance as his final chance to win her. The reality of that evening was far more brutal. Witnesses confirmed the girl flatly rejected every one of William's advances. Worse, she publicly chose his charismatic and confident best friend, Ruben, instead. Onlookers reported that Ruben and the girl danced all night, looking like a perfect pair, a public humiliation that crushed William's ego. A few students remembered one crucial detail. Near midnight, just before the disappearance, the pair had a heated argument by the lockers in a deserted hall. Their voices were incredibly strained, and William's face was twisted in silent fury. This new evidence finally revealed the night's dark trajectory. The task force now held a classic motive: wealth, social disparity, a shattered ego, and raw jealousy, a lethal cocktail ready to ignite. The myth of the lucky survivor who escaped a random predator was gone forever. By late April 2015, the investigation entered its final phase, and William Wade was summoned back to the Allentown precinct. During the call, a desk officer neutrally claimed they needed a quick database update to verify some routine details. The young man arrived expecting the same sympathetic treatment usually given to victims of traumatic crime. He remained completely oblivious that the detectives were currently guiding him toward a bleak, monochromatic hallway and into a specialized interrogation room, equipped with a bolted steel table and a hidden surveillance camera. The investigators had meticulously prepared a psychological trap that would strip away his facade of the traumatized, innocent victim. The heavy door behind William clicked shut with a sharp, cold, metallic sound. The elaborate deception he had maintained for a year had finally come apart. April 20th, 2015 is marked in Pennsylvania's criminal records as the day a decade's most cynical lie finally collapsed. Inside the cramped, soundproof room at the Allentown Police Department, under the dim glare of flickering fluorescent bulbs, two veteran homicide investigators sat across from William Wade at a bare metal desk. The young man, who had masqueraded as the victim of a sadistic, unknown assailant for months, now sat hunched under the camera's impassive lens. The officers didn't resort to threats. They worked with surgical precision, methodically dismantling his story layer by layer. Case folders were placed onto the metal table, each landing with a heavy, ominous thud. Initially, they presented weather reports of freezing rain that would have made survival in the woods biologically impossible. Then came technical data, proving a teenager could not physically break a steel padlock using only rusted rebar. But the crushing blow was the collection of statements from his own classmates. The detectives began reading aloud the testimony regarding William's resentment of Ruben Briggs's family wealth and the public humiliation he faced at prom when the girl he loved openly rejected him for his best friend. Transcripts indicate that at 1420, his psychological facade finally broke. William gripped his head and began rocking before collapsing into heavy sobs. Through his erratic, gasping tears, he finally spoke the words that rendered months of police investigation completely worthless. The kidnappers were a myth. The van, the basement, and the harrowing escape were all complete fabrications. For 6 months, the authorities had been chasing phantom suspects created by his own imagination. In his confession, Wade admitted that on that night, he and Ruben went to the quarry's edge, a fact confirmed by surveillance. They were drunk on stolen liquor and consumed by adolescent bitterness. Under the influence, they began arguing about the events of the prom night. The conversation quickly devolved into a violent, aggressive shouting match. William lashed out, accusing Ruben of flaunting his wealth and his elite university future, and specifically of shaming him in front of the entire school. A brief, desperate struggle broke out between them. Overcome by a sudden, blind rage, William shoved Ruben hard in the chest. That single, impulsive act was fatal. Ruben lost his balance on the limestone ledge and fell. It was a short drop, but the trajectory proved catastrophic. The boy's head struck the sharp edge of a concrete block left on the quarry floor from its industrial days. William described a sickening crack in the dark, followed by a sudden, terrifying silence. Death was instantaneous. In that moment, instead of calling for help or dialing 911 for an ambulance, William was overcome by a primitive, animalistic fear. Rational thought was completely replaced by a desperate need to hide. He checked for a pulse, realized his friend was dead, and instinctively chose to bury the truth. He seized the corpse by its shoulders, hauling the lifeless frame away from the quarry and toward the looming construction site. William dragged 180 pounds of dead weight through thick brush and sludge for nearly 1,000 feet. The physical toll was grueling, and during the struggle, a silver watch, a sentimental gift from his parents, snagged on a root and vanished into the mire, destined to become a forensic enigma for investigators 6 months later. This grim journey concluded at the deepest excavation pit intended for the Mercy Creek Municipal Hospital's new wing. William discarded his friend's remains into the trench, where they settled amidst a dense cage of steel rebar. Having recently applied for a labor position there, he was intimately familiar with the site's operational schedule. At daybreak on May 16th, a heavy convoy of concrete mixers rumbled onto the lot. The crew, oblivious to the body resting below, discharged thousands of tons of wet slurry into the foundation, entombing the 18-year-old forever beneath the city's massive medical infrastructure. After completing the act, William vanished into the shadows that night, fleeing the city entirely. He traveled a vast distance, crossing state lines on foot and by hitchhiking. For 6 months, he endured a derelict existence, taking refuge in illicit hostels and sleeping on the frozen floors of abandoned buildings. Every police siren triggered a panic. He was too terrified to look anyone in the eye. Ultimately, the combination of starvation and relentless paranoia fractured his psychological state. He fabricated a tale of abduction by a dark van, returning home as a traumatized victim rather than a suspect. As his chilling admission hung in the stale air of the interrogation room, the detective sat in a state of absolute, stunned silence. The long-standing mystery of the phantom killer had finally been solved. However, a much larger legal and physical catastrophe had just emerged. The investigators exchanged looks of dread, realizing the impossible situation that had just opened before them. The perpetrator sat weeping and admitting his guilt right in front of them, yet the primary evidence, the victim's body, lay 15 feet beneath a newly operational, multi-story hospital. At that very moment, surgeons were saving lives directly above the spot where Ruben Briggs was buried. The police department was left with no clear path for how justice could be served. Following William Wade's shocking confession on the morning of April 21, 2015, a fleet of patrol cars with flashing lights descended on the Mercy Creek Municipal Hospital. A task force of structural engineers and state officials gathered at the active medical facility. This group of geologists and construction leads joined elite forensic experts to determine if Ruben Briggs' remains could be recovered for burial. The committee spent hours reviewing complex blueprints in the hospital's boardroom, utilizing high-frequency radar to peer through the thick concrete, and performing rigorous mathematical simulations on the spot. The final verdict, delivered by the chief engineer at 7 in the evening, was devastating. Data confirmed the body was 15 feet deep, positioned directly under a main support pillar of the south wing. Engineering analysis concluded that recovery was impossible without partially demolishing the medical facility. Any attempt to breach that massive concrete monolith would jeopardize the structural integrity of the entire building, potentially disabling critical life support and surgical systems. It would have required a dangerous evacuation of intensive care patients. The local chief faced his darkest mission, notifying the Briggs family that their son's grave was permanent and unreachable. Official logs indicate the parents flatly refused to accept the news. Sedation became the only remedy for Ruben's mother, who spent several agonizing minutes gasping for air in total shock. Having endured a full year of psychological torture and uncertainty, the family was broken. Their daily hope for a miracle was finally extinguished by a reality far more cruel and surreal. They were forced to accept the harrowing legal truth that a physical recovery of the body was impossible. The vast municipal hospital, once a symbol of healing, was effectively converted into the state's most expensive headstone. The boy's final resting place was now the cold, impenetrable concrete base of the infirmary. His grave remains hidden beneath the constant vibration of medical carts and the hum of industrial ventilation. The trial of William Wade opened in late 2015 and concluded in just 21 days. Public expectations, fueled by local media hungry for a sensationalist narrative, were soon subverted. The community had prepared for a confrontation with a predatory, cold-blooded killer, yet the evidence presented a much more pathetic figure. As the defendant entered the courtroom in his orange inmate attire, the gallery witnessed a hollowed-out, trembling young man rather than a manipulative criminal. He avoided the eyes of the grieving family, his thin frame shaking as he stared at the floor. When the prosecution detailed the night's horrific events, he broke down, hiding his face in his hands. The defense focused their case on his youth and the intense emotional shock of the moment. They emphasized the role of alcohol and the paralyzing terror that overrode his rational judgment. After reviewing the professional assessments of the forensic specialists, the jury concluded that the fatal altercation lacked the element of prior murderous intent. Under the state's legal framework, the charges were officially downgraded. On November 10th, the court delivered its final judgment to the public. Wade received a lenient sentence for the charges of unintentional homicide and tampering with evidence. He was given 10 years in a correctional facility, with a chance at parole after 7 for maintaining good conduct. The verdict left Allentown with a lingering sense of bitterness and unresolved grief. This tragedy at the limestone quarry stands as a dark case study in the anatomy of fear. It demonstrated that true horror often arises not from a villain's plan, but from a single, catastrophic loss of impulse control. Had William resisted his primitive panic on that cool evening in May, had he simply reached for his phone and dialed 911, the trajectory of their lives would have been completely different. A forensic autopsy would have immediately validated the theory of a tragic mishap, and the youth, possessing an unblemished background, would have likely received only probation or community labor. Instead, his cowardice and the decision to bury his sins under tons of wet concrete created a permanent foundation of lies that ultimately led to his own undoing. He terminated his best friend's life and effectively erased any hope for his own. Now, Mercy Creek Hospital looms over the town, a silent, permanent monument to the devastating price of a single, fatal mistake. The tragedy of William Wade and Ruben Briggs is more than a cold case. It is a chilling anatomy of the human heart under the pressure of envy and fear. It serves as a haunting reminder that while a single impulsive act can end a life, it is the choice to lie that erases a soul. We often believe we can bury our darkest mistakes deep enough to forget them. We think that if we pour enough concrete 15 feet of industrial foundation over our sins, the world will never know. But a lie is a heavy burden to carry. For 6 months, William wore the mask of a survivor, but he was a prisoner of his own making long before he entered a jail cell. Mercy Creek Hospital stands today as a surreal monument to this truth, a place meant for healing, built atop a foundation of betrayal. It teaches us that cowardice is a tomb with no exit. The lesson is simple yet profound. Own your truth before it owns you. In your darkest hour, choose the weight of honesty over the crushing gravity of a secret. Once the concrete sets on a lie, there is no digging your way back to the light. Character is not defined by the mistakes we make, but by the courage we find to face them.